Capitalism, an Introduction by libcom.org.
Oh boy, we already started off, and yep, there's already an error. Well, not an error, but something wrong with this argument. libcom.org, a website for libertarian communist. Well, now you know he's pretty much a communist at this point, so we won't have to make that mistake in the other video. Not only that, but let's not forget that it's impossible to be a libertarian communist considering how you need the initiation of force to do communism, while a libertarian advocates for a limited government, which communism can never have. So basically it's just delusional. But hey, let's continue.
At its root, capitalism is an economic system based on three things: wage labor, working for a wage; private ownership or control of the means of production, things like factories, machinery, farms and offices; and production for exchange and profit. While some people own means of production or capital, most of us don't, and so to survive, we need to sell our ability to work in return for a wage, or else scrape by on benefits.
Yeah, you got it right for the first two. You got it right for the first part. Yeah, the 3 points you made were great. However, the problem with your argument is this. We aren't forced to sell our labor. It's all voluntary. Now, sure, while some companies might... Well, sure, some companies don't like to pay that much. Certain companies pay more than others, and system of inequality is all based on the basis of your skills and how good you are doing a certain job. So really, it's a voluntary agreement, which basically the employee sells his sells his labor to the employer in exchange for a wage. It's not forced upon you. And by the way, scraping on benefits, they're actually quite generous in terms of how crazy these democratic, social democracy countries in Europe do it. So you don't just scrape by on them, you can live off of them. Continue.
This first group of people is the capitalist class or bourgeoisie in Marxist jargon, and the second group is the working class or proletariat. Capitalism is based on a simple process. Money is invested to generate more money. When money functions like this, it functions as capital. For instance, when a company uses its profits to hire more staff or open new premises and so make more profit, the money here is functioning as capital. As capital increases or the economy expands, this is called capital accumulation, and it's the driving force of the economy. Those accumulating capital do so better when they can shift costs onto others. If companies can cut costs by not protecting the environment or by paying sweatshop wages, they will. So catastrophic climate change and widespread poverty are signs of the normal functioning of the system.
Oh my god. Now the first part on capital accumulation is correct. Basically you use money to invest to create profits, and invest that profit into new businesses, new areas, to eventually get even more money in a cycle, which is pretty much how the economy expands. However, cutting costs, while companies will probably do that if unregulated, we have regulation for that. Which you do realize that, right? We have regulation for all sorts of things. So many things are very unnecessary, actually. So your argument that they'll just destroy the environment is completely false. They will if unregulated, but even then, majority of regulation is kind of useless, and they already are regulated in those areas. So we have environmental protection and minimum wage. Continue.
Furthermore, for money to make more money, more and more things have to be exchangeable for money. Thus, the tendency is for everything from everyday items to DNA sequences to carbon dioxide emissions and, crucially, our ability to work, to become commodified. And it is this last point, the commodification of our creative and productive capacities, our ability to work, which holds the secret to capital accumulation. Money does not turn into more money by magic, but by the work we do every day. In a world where everything is for sale, we all need something to sell in order to buy the things we need. Those of us with nothing to sell except our ability to work have to sell this ability to those who own the factories, offices, etc. And of course, the things we produce at work aren't ours. They belong to our bosses.
Oh my god. Again? You really don't understand the idea of making a voluntary exchange. You're not selling your work Instead, you're exchanging it for a wage. It's a difference. And by the way, considering that a boss owns everything you own, are you trying to advocate for the workers owning the means of production? I mean, no, we are, but what comes out of it? In that case, that would mean that why would the boss even bother, considering there's no reason to make profits? I mean, humans are naturally greedy, and they want to make as much money as possible, so the idea that we have to share is just ridiculous. But continue.
Going as workers. The wages we get roughly match the cost of the products necessary to keep us alive and able to work each day, which is why, at the end of each month, our bank balance rarely looks that different to the month before. The difference between the wages we are paid and the value we create is how capital is accumulated or profit is made. This difference between the wages we're paid and the value we create is called surplus value. The extraction of surplus value by employers is the reason we view capitalism as a system based on exploitation, the exploitation of the working class. This process is essentially the same for all wage labour, not just that in private companies. Public sector workers also face constant attacks on their wages and conditions in order to reduce costs and maximise profits across the economy as a whole. The capitalist economy also relies on the unpaid labour of women working in the home.
Again, capitalism is not exploitation. It's a voluntary agreement in which the worker trades his work for a wage. And while I'll admit that some workers are underpaid, the majority aren't. In fact, when it comes to the US, we pay a lot more than China, yet it only costs around 4 cents more for every dollar. Yet it only costs around, I think, China, if something costs 96 cents there, it'll cost like $100 cents here. So really, we pay a lot more in there. We pay a lot more here, and we only get slightly a bit higher cost out of that. Oh yeah, I forgot, China isn't as free of a market as the US. Continue. And by the way, the fact that women shouldn't act traditional gender roles shows how ignorant you are. You want the downfall of society. Cultural Marxist! But let's continue.
Competition. In order to accumulate capital, our boss must compete in the market with bosses of other companies. They cannot afford to ignore market forces, or they will lose ground to their rivals, lose money, go bust, get taken over, and ultimately cease to be our boss. Therefore, even the bosses aren't really in control of capitalism. Capital itself is. It's because of this that we can talk about capital as if it has agency or interests of its own. And so often, talking about capital is more precise than talking about bosses. Both bosses and workers, therefore, are alienated by this process, but in different ways. While from the worker's perspective, our alienation is experienced through being controlled by our boss, the boss experiences it through impersonal market forces and competition with other bosses. Because of this, bosses and politicians are powerless in the face of market forces, each needing to act in a way conducive to continued accumulation, and in any case, they do quite well out of it.
First of all, competition is a good thing, as it lowers the prices for the consumer, which basically gives you more money out of your wages. When you go to someone else who's a lot cheaper prices than if you go shopping, and you have to go to one store, the other store that sells same stuff for a lot cheaper, you're gonna go there, and the bosses want to find a way to reduce cost. But here's the thing about that: when you reduce cost for lower costs on the consumer, you, the consumer, also knows the worker will also benefit. Not to mention, competition creates innovation because companies will outdo each other. Let's look at the technology industry. If NVIDIA pretty much dominated the whole thing, then why would they have a need to even innovate at all? They'd have complete control. But hey, you just are ignorant in economics. You haven't read any books like The Wealth of Nations, Das Kapital, Basic Economics by Thomas Sowell, etc. So let's continue.
They cannot act in our interest, since any concessions they grant us will help their competitors on a national or international level. For example, if a manufacturer develops new technology for making cars which doubles productivity, it can lay off half its workers, increase its profits, and reduce the price of its cars in order to undercut its competition. If another company wants to be nice to its employees and not sack people, eventually it will be driven out of business or taken over by its more ruthless competitor.
Okay, first of all, when a company figures out a way to make cars at half the cost, or like double the productivity of cars, they're going to hire more workers to double this productivity. They're not going to lay off a bunch of them. Well, think about it. You may have the same amount of productivity, so you're going to double it. And most likely it's going to be a bit cheaper as well. So you're essentially going to have to hire some more workers to deal with this double productivity, so eventually get quadruple productivity. See what I mean? 1/2 times 2 equals 1/2 times 2 equals 1. 2 times 2 equals 4. I mean, no. 1 times 2 equals 4. I mean 2. So essentially, you're gonna get double productivity, just by hiring more workers, and once you figure out this innovation, because you'll need more workers to deal with this double productivity. But continue.
So we'll also have to bring in the new machinery and make the layoffs to stay competitive. Of course, if businesses were given a completely free hand to do as they please, monopolies would soon develop and stifle competition, which would lead to the system grinding to a halt. The state intervenes, therefore, to act on behalf of the long-term interests of capital as a whole. The state. The primary function of the state in capitalist society is to maintain the capitalist system and aid the accumulation of capital. As such, the state uses repressive laws and violence against the working class when we try to further our interests against capital. For example, bringing in anti-strike laws or sending in police or soldiers to break up strikes and demonstrations. The ideal type of state under capitalism at the present time is liberal democratic. However, in order to continue capital accumulation, at times different political systems are used by capital to do this. State capitalism in the USSR and fascism in Italy and Germany are two such models.
The state does not respect private property rights, which is basically the enabler of capitalism. Private property rights. They are not the enabler of it, they hinder it. A state cannot make capitalism, it can only take it away. You do realize this, right? Not only that, but Soviet Russia is not state capitalist. It opposes private property rights and the means of production in private hands. Therefore, it's not capitalist. It's not even state capitalist. State communism is when the workers own the means of production. Capitalism is when private businesses do so. State capitalism is not an actual term. See where I'm going here? Not only that, but let's not forget that even though there's corruption in the government when it comes to capitalism, most of the time it's actually just to enable corporatism, not true capitalism. I'll leave a link down in the description of what corporatism is and what capitalism is. It's a good video I've created. But let's continue.
Which were necessary for the authorities at the time in order to co-opt and crush powerful working class movements. Movements which threatened the very continuation of capitalism. When the excesses of bosses cause workers to fight back, alongside repression, the state occasionally intervenes to make sure business as usual resumes without disruption. For this reason, national and international laws protecting workers' rights and the environment exist. Generally, the strength and enforcement of these laws ebbs and flows in relation to the balance of power between employers and employees in any given time and place. For example, in France, where workers are more well-organized and militant, there is a maximum working week of 35 hours. In the UK, where workers are less militant, the maximum is 48 hours. And in the US, where workers are even less likely to strike, there is no maximum at all.
First of all, maximum working hours does not help capitalism. Well, actually, yeah, you are making the argument that workers are more militant. However, I'd argue that workers aren't exactly militant here because most people here don't work. A lot of people are here on benefits. When the state owns meat production, then essentially you're going to have a lot of people on government-made benefits. You don't see that many striking in communist countries, do you? Well, actually, you do a lot, but you don't see that many against capitalism. So, in essence, what you're trying to say is that The more militant workers are, the more likely laws are gonna be put in place against capitalism. However, which basically contradicts your statement that a state is the enabler of capitalism. In fact, the U.S. actually has one of the least free market economies. Well, not the least, but lesser compared to so-called socialist countries like Norway and Denmark. It is less economic freedom. So you're basically contradicting yourself there. Let's continue.
History. Capitalism is presented as a natural system, formed a bit like mountains or land masses by forces beyond human control, that it is an economic system ultimately resulting from human nature. However, it was not established by natural forces, but by intense and massive violence across the globe. First, in the advanced countries, enclosures drove self-sufficient peasants from communal land into the cities to work in factories. Any resistance was crushed. People who resisted the imposition of wage labor were subjected to vagabond laws and imprisonment, torture, deportation, or execution. In England, under the reign of Henry VIII alone, 72,000 people were executed for vagabondage.
But here's the thing about that. That's not modern-day capitalism. There is no real economic freedom in there. That's more feudalism, in which essence the middleman cannot become rich. Capitalism is when the people own the means of production, and it's all voluntary. This is not capitalism. It's more feudalism more than anything else.
Later, capitalism was spread by invasion and conquest by Western imperialist powers around the globe. Whole civilizations were brutally destroyed, with communities driven from their land into waged work. The only countries that avoided conquest were those, like Japan, which adopted capitalism on their own in order to compete with the other imperial powers. Everywhere capitalism developed, peasants and early workers resisted, but were eventually overcome by mass terror and violence. Capitalism did not arise by a set of natural laws which stem from human nature. It was spread by the organized violence of the elite. The concept of private property of land and means of production might seem now like the natural state of things. However, we should remember it is a man-made concept enforced by conquest.
Ooh, you're looking at one thing, you hypocrites. Communism, or what do you like to call state capitalism, was also responsible for conquest. Let's look at the Soviet Union, for example. That's a huge example of imperialistic state capitalism. That's a huge example. Really, the idea that capitalism is based on conquest and oppression stems from Karl Marx's critical theory, in which basically there are so-called oppressors and people who are oppressed. I'll leave a link down in the description to the critical theory. I mean, not in the description, but in the comments. If I remember to, anyway. Remind me to if you want me to. Let's continue.
Similarly, the existence of a class of people with nothing to sell but their labor power is not something which has always been the case. Common land shared by all was seized by force, and the dispossessed forced to work for a wage under the threat of starvation or even execution. As capital expanded, it created a global working class consisting of the majority of the world's population, whom it exploits but also depends on. As Karl Marx wrote, what the bourgeoisie therefore produces, above all, are its own gravediggers. The future. Capitalism has only existed as the dominant economic system on the planet for a little over 200 years. Compared to the 200,000 years of human existence, it is a momentary blip, and so it would be naive to assume that it will last forever. It is entirely reliant on us, the working class, and our labor, which it must exploit, and so it will only survive as long as we let it.
Okay, I'm gonna look up the dictionary definition of capitalism right now. I'm going to google.com. Capitalism. Economic system, and economic political system is a country's trade and industry controlled by private owners for profit rather than the state. Okay. So in essence, what you're trying to say is that capitalism has only existed for 200 years and it's not natural. Are you kidding me? People or entrepreneurs have existed since the beginning of time. We are naturally greedy. It's one of our traits. So you're saying that people only started having private property for 200 years. Bullcrap. Also, those lands that people commonly owned were not nearly as efficient as privately owned lands. Or industrialized farming. But hey, what should I expect? This is me, that raving ranger here, signing out. Have a good one. See you in hell, Libertarian Socialist Rants. See you in hell.